Did you want me to go now?
Very good morning. Very good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you like me? Should I start talking now?
Good morning. Good up. No, sir. I'll just start. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all present over here. On behalf of Odisha Library Academy Organizing Committee, I am Bijoy Ketan Panda. Extend a warm welcome to our 6th webinar on strategic library reopening in a pandemic world. Our resource persons today is Stephen Abram, Executive Director of Federation of Ontario Public Libraries Canada. And we are the information professionals must adapt to change created by the pandemic COVID-19. I'm sure we must have adopted new ways and means to cope up with webinar with the current scenario and for a new normal. We hope we will learn more from this webinar. As the webinar progress, we'll post our feedback link in the discussion forum, and it will be activated for 2 hours. Those who will provide the feedback at the end of the webinar, they will get the certificate. I'm thankful to OLA for giving me this opportunity to coordinate this webinar with great pleasure. Let me introduce to our Odisha Library President, Dr. Banambar Sahoo, to speak more about Odisha Library Academy. Over to you, our President, Dr. Banambar Sahoo.
Thank you, Dr. Bijoy Ketan Panda. Very good evening and namaskar and good morning. Welcome to Odisha Library Academy. On behalf of Odisha Library Academy, I, Dr. Banambar Sahoo, President of OLA, welcome you to this today's international webinar. International webinar is the time of the COVID time. This is the real situation during COVID. We have organized this international webinar. We are happy that among us, guest personality like Stephen Abram, Executive Director of Federation of Ontario Library, Canada, is the speaker of today's program. The topic of this webinar is strategic reopening of the library in the pandemic world, which is the need of the hour. I will speak 2 lines about the Odisha Library Academy. Odisha Library Academy is the brainchild of young and dynamic library and information professionals of Odisha. It was started in 2015. During these 5 years, we have organized a lot of conferences, and it has become very popular not in Odisha but throughout India. During this lockdown period and due to the crisis of COVID-19, our technically sound library professionals has started this webinar. Today is the 6th webinar, which last 5 webinars was a grand success, and total report will be given by our webmaster after the presentation is over. And for that purpose, I am very much thankful to all the web team and all the Odisha Library Academy members for their effort to bring this dynamic features, the professional work in the professional way, for which we are very much, we are very much thankful to our OLA team for this webinar. And I hope this webinar will take the Odisha Library Academy to a new height. And thank you. After that, now, before starting the presentation, I will request our coordinator, today's coordinator, Dr. Nrusingha Kumar Das. He will give the brief introduction about the today's research person. Over to Dr. Nrusingha. Thank you very much.
Good evening, one and all. Thank you, Banambar sir, for giving me this opportunity to give introduction of a very renowned person, Stephen Abram. So, good evening, friends. Stephen Abram is the Executive Director Federation of Ontario Public Libraries, and Principal Lighthouse Consulting Inc., Canada. Stephen Abram is the founder of Lighthouse Consulting Inc., as I told. He has deep root in Canada's library sector as a strategy and direction planning and consultant for libraries and information industries. He represents Ontario's over 306 public libraries. Can you imagine 306 public libraries? He has been a librarian over 40 years, always in management and strategy development roles. He has acted as a change agent in many organizations, as well as having developed a number of community versed in felicitation, strategy, community-led development, lobbying, change. His literary contribution, he has published many literature in the form of books and articles. Some of his books are Information Service Today, An Introduction, The Libraries 2020, Creating a Culture of Evaluation, Taking Your Library from Talk to Action, then Reinventing Reference, How Libraries Deliver Value in the Age of Google. He is also innovator and author of a Stephen's Lighthouse blog. He teaches future thinkers as well. He is a teacher as well. He thinking future thinkers as well as library conversation at the graduate level at University of Toronto's Faculty of Information. He has held executive leadership position in libraries at Cengage Learning, Thomson Publishing, ProQuest, Micromind, IHS, etc. He sits on a number of university and startup boards also. He has given keynotes in over 40 countries, 49 US states, and all 10 provinces. And we are lucky, sir, having you with us in this platform. Really, sir, we are lucky.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And just tell me if you can't see the slides. I'm hoping it works well. It's a lovely Saturday morning here in Toronto in Canada. And I'm quite honored to have Odisha Library Academy ask me to speak this morning. The gentlemen running the show have been kind and gracious in orienting me and helping me understand some of the needs in India. There's a picture of me in a suit, although I don't know after the emergency crisis that I'm going to ever wear a suit again. But the world has changed, and that's why we need to be strategic about this stuff. My latest book is up on Amazon, and you can download it there. There's some used copies for a less expensive choice, but of course I recommend it. I wrote it. So here's some basic philosophies to be strategic. Staff and user safety is the first priority. We are a profession that deals in professional customer service that is excellent. It's very difficult to give excellent customer service if the staff are scared or the users are afraid to come into our libraries. We are among the most trusted institutions in our world, and we can't lose that trust. So not only do we have to be safe, we have to be perceived as safe and visibly safe. So I'm going to talk about the strategies for some of that. Also, we need to really internalize our understanding that we are not returning to the old normal. There's been a permanent behavioral change as a result of this crisis. The old normal is nostalgia. It's gone. We are creating a new normal, and it's a great opportunity. It's an ill wind, a bad black cloud that doesn't have a silver lining in it where we can work on improving things better than they were before. So we need to reframe what user behaviors are changing. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But we've already seen a massive increase in some modern technology skills. Just for instance, like Zoom meetings or this webinar, people are adopting the ability to do their work or their learning or their recreation in different ways than they did before. But it's important that we remember what value our library delivers and the strategic impacts of our efforts. So it's one thing to say we get articles and books. That's not valuable. It's another thing to say that we deliver value by improving the quality of questions. We deliver value by supporting the learning needs and goals of our users, whether they're students or whether they're residents of our communities, or whether they're other employees, coworkers. And then we can't make these changes to a new normal without knowing our personal and organizational values. What are the values that our organization subscribes to? Is it customer service? Is it learning? Is it quality research? Is it great products? Is it a social context that's positive for our communities? And then our own personal values around, most librarians have a social value context. They believe in providing service equitably to all, and they believe in education and learning, and those are values that underpin our profession that are vitally important. Since we're going to change to a new normal and a new frame of what our libraries will look like, we are going to have to understand that change cannot happen if we offend the values of ourselves, because we will not be motivated to do it, or offend the values of our organizations or communities. So we need to understand that we will need to look at values like books and ebooks, or look at objects like books and ebooks and realize the value is in the reading, not in the format. And so this COVID crisis has created an opportunity for more people to experience ebooks and discover whether they prefer it or not. Right now, we're seeing about a 50-50 split, and with a third of the people being hybrid readers, reading both formats. So that's always an interesting thing to look at as we create stuff. I'm sure many of you have seen the Chinese symbol for crisis, which is what we're in right now. It combines the two symbols for chaos and opportunity. And I think that shows the great Asian wisdom of the opportunities in a crisis, but also the ambiguity of dealing in a world full of chaos. So, thinking strategically, there's 6 sort of basics. One is to have a positive mindset. We need to look at things positively and not dwell in some of the horrors of the environment we're in right now. And that positive mindset motivates us to create a new environment that meets the needs of the people and institutions we care about. There is also not one goal in this environment. The goal isn't reopening. The goal is, what do the libraries look like for the next 5 years? And it's highly likely, looking at the research right now, that this is a 18-month, 3-year, or 5-year permanent condition. Like, it's one thing to say we get the vaccine and we can, if it comes, and we can inoculate everybody, but getting to the 65% herd immunity that's necessary means it'll take even longer. So we're going to see people worried and dealing with difficult circumstances for the normal 3 to 5 year planning horizon that library strategic plans work with. We need to consider at least 3 scenarios, and we can't choose one. We need to have alternate strategies depending on how the environment changes. So we can have an environment where we only have 1 or 2 waves of this virus and then it declines, or effective treatments and vaccines come in. We can have an environment where we have repeated closures and lockdowns due to multiple waves of the virus. And that's and as we learn more about it, that's possibly the most likely scenario. And then we can have a third scenario where these sort of pandemics might be, given the global nature of our world, a semi-permanent condition. And so how do we deal with the changes wrought under this? For those of you in academic institutions, we'll talk about that later, but if the majority of your non-laboratory based students are doing things by e-learning, that's a fundamental shift from the in-classroom kind of learning that was the dominant model. We also need to bake in nimbleness and flexibility. We can't study something. I always say librarians like to study things to death, and I got to point out that death is not our goal. Our goal is to thrive. So we need to be able to pivot on a dime. So my libraries in Ontario were closed with 1 day's notice, and they pivoted on a dime to increase by about 1,000% the usage of their digital resources and how they related to their communities. They did it with the help of our agencies and the Federation and our Library Association. And we need to build comfort with ambiguity. And this is a 2-part thing. One is each of us as individuals needs to be comfortable when there are no known answers, and that we need to adapt on the fly, and we need to be comfortable with ambiguity. Those of us who are leaders in our institutions need to have the conversations with our staff and colleagues, and sometimes with our markets, the faculty and the students, or the community members, the library card holders, that things are not going to stay the same on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. And thinking strategically is building a better new normal. And that comes to the big question. What is it that's impossible to do today that, if we could, would fundamentally improve our library's success? So we need to move from the impossible to the probable to the opportunities and possibilities. And then say, if our library's success is dependent on improving student learning, what do we need to do? Are we present in the lesson level learning of e-learning when the students aren't on campus? Are we present in the course developers who are building this stuff, the faculty and the technology design people? Are we present there? Do we have those relationships? And how? And if it was impossible before, we need to move past that impossibility and move into understanding that. Is it possible to build online programs and acquire online programs from a public library so that the programs that were in our branches, whether they were story times or reading lessons or employment support, how to find a job, or how to do e-government, how do we make that happen? So some of the lessons learned at the Federation were that the work we've done over the last 7 years, and it's from a very coordinated advocacy and influence model that we have been following that we invested in long-term relationships. There are 10 ministries that affect the success of libraries. Funding only came from one, and when I joined FOPL, the fairly good relationships were with the Ministry of Culture, which coordinates culture funding, which includes libraries. However, the budget was set by the Ministry of Finance, and we had to invest in relationships there. The infrastructure money came from the Ministry of Infrastructure, which helps us build new branches and do renovations. The long-term healthcare ministry dealt with dealing with people with disabilities. The Ministry of Education dealt with licensing resources for schools. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, most libraries in Ontario are funded by the municipality. About 96% of the funding comes from property taxes, which is disrupted in this COVID relationship. But the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing was totally redesigning the way that capital funding was available for building new library branches. So I had to build those relationships to change the laws in that area. So those investments in long-term relationships with government, and those are personal relationships, like I can have a coffee with people in the cabinet, with members of parliament, the provincial parliament, the legislature. I can have meetings with civil servants. They take my phone calls in all those ministries. And so those long-term relationships were vital when we were hit with the pandemic. We could start to mine them, and we were brought to the table rather than having to beg to be at the table when decisions were being made about closures or opportunities for reopening. We need to invest in partnerships and alliances. So we did a lot of webinars 5 years ago to build a province-wide model on how to have partnerships with local social service agencies, our e-government, electronic government services like Service Ontario and Service Canada, and alliances with people who had certain audiences. So if we had underuse from New Canadians, for instance, we had alliances with the services to support New Canadians. Or we would have alliances with the local clubs that might be ethnic or might be around daycares. We have alliances with daycares and schools. So we now have over 10,000 partnerships and alliances among our 306 library systems and 1,157 library branches. And then, importantly, to achieve a lot of our stuff, we invested in professional government relations advisors who have the relationships that could bring us in and expand their stuff. So they are also getting their calls taken, but they're good at talking to the Premier of the province or the Prime Minister of Canada and getting us on the radar when it's necessary. Just a little history. The pandemic became clear in Canada February-March 2020. The provincial government ordered everything but essential services closed on March 18th. So we all moved to work from home, or we had to lay off or furlough employees. The federal government closed the borders and much of our economy. On June 8th, public libraries were permitted to offer curbside pickup, mostly by appointment for holds. I wrote the rules for that because they consulted us. And then we got them to agree to the principle that our local community library boards would make the ultimate decision of what branches they would open, not all of them, etc., because it's too complicated for the government to control. We have public libraries that are co-located with old age homes. You cannot open a library that's in an old age home because that's where most of our cases are. We have public libraries in malls. Our stores with street-facing doors are open. Our malls aren't. We have libraries that are located in schools. Our schools have been shut down until at least September and pushed on to home learning. On June 12th, some regions, whatever's small urban and up, all of our large urban centers have more COVID because of it's driven by population density and somewhat by people in poverty have higher levels of coronavirus. We have a good healthcare system in Canada that's free to everyone, but the density issues drive some of it. So now my libraries are open with tight restrictions. Their computers can be open, their front desk can be open, and they have restrictions on how things work, and of course restrictions or rules around personal protection equipment that encourages the staff to behave effectively. It is now, today it's 100 days of physical lockdown. We sent out a communication to all of our members not to say they were closed. The rule is don't ever say you're closed. Say you're physically closed when you're physically closed, but always emphasize that you're open 24/7 and digital. So we've seen massive increases in the digital use of libraries. 3 slides on what we did right. We over-communicated. My members get emails, newsletters, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and our blog and our website I filter all the information. So I served as a resource for quality information, such as all the materials quarantine research, which I kept and read and eventually turned it into a recommendation to the government. We have reopening checklists from around the world that we built our own Ontario reopening checklist. Many of these reopening checklists, for example, I learned from one list that you should, if your library's been closed for over a month, you should run the water for a few hours because we could have a risk of Legionnaire's disease because it's carried by water that hasn't been moving. So that sort of stuff is just things you don't normally think about because your library is always open. You never have to run your water. And then we created HR policies and legal interpretation of board rules. We have in Ontario a right to refuse work, but having the right to refuse work and knowing what the legal protocols are to do that. We also have the board as the independent legal entity that has control, not the municipality. So for some mayors and municipalities, for some chief administrative officers, we had to make phone calls to tell them that something they had just done was illegal and to get them to pull back. So we synthesized a variety of rules, policies, research, and government publications into advisories and recommendations for all public libraries in Ontario so that we could have consistent from community to community. And then we scanned and shared directions and policies from allied sectors. So I keep track of everything that's happening in our primary and secondary schools, what the colleges and universities are doing. They're gradually announcing that they're not going to reopen in the fall and they're going to e-learning with the exception of laboratory-based courses. What's happening in business and retail. Retail is important in the public library sector because it has very similar issues to us. The only major difference is we get everything back and they only get a minor amount of returns. So many of our retailers aren't taking returns right now. I follow architecture and interior planning blogs. Part of Lighthouse Consulting's practice is to design new libraries and do master plans for all the libraries in the community. And This very much affects how one designs or redesigns or renovates the footprint of our physical space. And then because I know people in lots of countries around the world through work with IFLA and visits to over 40 countries and seeing their libraries, I'm uniquely positioned to do an international scan and know what other countries are doing that's smart, or steal this idea, because libraries share. We built sharing and manage and collaboration mechanisms. So we were early adopters of Zoom, Slack, and the webinar tools. So many libraries have gone to Slack so that as a software, so that their staff can do virtual teaming and build mini Slacks that allow just the children's librarians to talk about how do we do story hour online, or just the collection development librarians saying what books are going to be really needed when we reopen. For instance, we know that gardening is going to be huge this summer. It's summer up here. Because people are going to be growing their own food. But we also know, sadly, that we're going to need more books on personal bankruptcy, because so many people have been financially hurt by this crisis. And then we need more books on working from home. FOPL also invested over the last 3 years in our Open Media Desk. Open Media Desk is training that shows people how to make impactful 5 lessons that take about 6 weeks with homework, lessons on how to make impactful quality communications through social media and your website. Our people who have taken the course have gotten, on average, 500% increases in their community engagement. And we're talking real engagement, not just hits, but did they share something the library sent out on Twitter? Did they like something that was on the Facebook page? Did they share it? So we have a set of measures for the entire province and all of the websites. I also have a dashboard of where I can look at what's happening on over 150 library websites and social media accounts, and I can see what's happening in each of the communities. So when the COVID emergency hit, I started sending out 5 to 8 templated Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, website, and video posts per day that communities could choose to share, so that the digital presence wasn't just look at a book or download an ebook. Every library in Ontario has 30,000 ebooks, and the larger ones have 100,000 each. I focused on our cardholder challenges, such as keeping your kids entertained, learn from home schooling, finding cultural experiences like museum and gallery tours, traveling from your easy chair, that sort of stuff, because loneliness, isolation, and engagement for kids, teens, adults, and seniors is a challenge when you're locked up at home. We also focused on social challenges in our communities that increased due to quarantine. This was an important, we've always been relevant on this level, but it's always been quietly done when someone on the desk sees a student struggling, or someone on the desk sees a teen or someone with mental health issues and gives them some support. So we started sharing the province-wide health lines. Ours is called telemedicine, telehealth, for health, so that they could phone and not overwhelm our hospital emergency wards, which is why we flattened the curve. Any mental health hotlines, Alcoholics Anonymous, etc., that have moved online, suicide hotlines, teen hotlines, support groups, anything that dealt with loneliness or social isolation and its potential consequences. Sorry. By stepping up to the plate on this, we it communicated, and the long-term behavioral change we're hoping to see is that when we do reopen, our courses on mental health, our services on mental health, our services on who are the at-risk populations. So our at-risk populations for social issues are largely teens in small towns, senior social isolation, new Canadians who don't have the networks that they might need to adapt to what's offered in Ontario. And then lastly, we hosted dozens, or like you're doing with Odisha, or participated in many recorded webinars and teleconference conversations. We would do a webinar when we needed to transfer information, like we're doing today, and then at the end we'll have questions. But a teleconference allows conversations amongst intimate groups. So I could have a conversation just with library board members who are community-led people who are on our boards, non-librarians. Or I could have a conversation with just the marketing folks. Or I could have a conversation or facilitate a conversation with the CEOs, the top person in our library. And then we worked collaboratively with our partner associations and the government agencies that support our community. What we did right, focused on government relations because we needed money, and we're working on, and we expect to get many millions of dollars over the next couple of months to deal with some of our strategic issues. We also tracked municipal decision-making across the 430 municipalities and counties in Ontario, and we intervened when necessary. Our CEOs of the local board would ask us, and there's a small team of 4 of us who are well informed on the laws, could call up a CAO or a mayor, and so far we've been successful on getting them to retract any damage to libraries. We also set up weekly, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, teleconferences with the political and policy-making cabinet offices of 6 ministries, as well as those senior civil servants who have a mandate to work with public libraries. By doing this, we got ahead of decisions that were being made, and were able to fine-tune them so there wouldn't be confusion with our folks. We maintained regular conversations with our allied associations and agencies for public libraries, but I also maintained strong relationship with cultural organizations like the Ontario Museum Association, entertainment and tourism organizations. We got the head of Ontario Library Association put on the tourism recovery and entertainment recovery, attractions recovery task force. We work with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And then we work with the library-oriented college and university consortial sectors, because we're all learning from each other, and we all have very similar issues. And then we worked with all of our folks to make sure that we had the webinars and we had them recorded so that they could be shared. So I know a lot of you in Odisha are part of a learning strategy. You're part of corporate learning or community learning or college and university learning. And the issue is, if you're not at the table, you're the meal. So it's very important you get at the table strategically on what's happening in your community. So we mind our investment in the relationships I've discussed previously, and we were at the table on all major decisions. Many of my public library CEOs were key members of their municipalities' ERT, the emergency response team, from the beginning, and they were put in the command and control center. This meant that, for instance, Toronto Public Library's head, when 85% of our food banks that serve the poor had to close because their volunteers were mostly seniors and they weren't safe going out in the early days, they opened 12 libraries as food banks and staffed them with trained staff to make sure that our most at-risk communities in our city were handled well. We also had dozens of libraries taking their STEAM labs, their science, technology, engineering, arts, and math laboratories with 3D printers. We put our laser cutters and 3D printers and centralized them into the University Health Network, which is a network of 15 very prestigious hospitals in downtown Toronto, and started making personal protective equipment when there was a shortage, because we had the equipment and was just sitting in closed libraries. Those are just two small examples of how libraries did it. Another thing they did was they took furloughed staff back to keep them employed, and they would make the wellness calls for the social service agencies so that our social workers could do more important work than just double checking that everybody was healthy. Right now, we're seeing librarians being used for contact tracing because we have the research skills to do that. So it's a way of keeping our employees employed while at the same time doing good service and taking advantage of their skills. We were lucky that we got our ministry to give us notice in advance, but we usually saw the draft of a press release just before it went out, so we could prepare to advise our sector on what was coming and do a little bit of quick thinking. Sometimes it was only a day or two, sometimes it was weeks. Right now, I've got one I know about that won't happen for a few months. However, it allows us to prepare because we had made the investment in the relationships. And then having the ability to share with key decision makers our advice, our recommendations, our concerns, our issues, and incidents that are happening. And to their credit, civil servants, bless their little cotton socks, listened and did good by us. And I'm very proud and thankful for them. So where are we at right now? Some of our communities are in phase 2, and some remain in phase 1. So phase 1, which is our large urban centers, are still on pretty secure lockdown. Phase 2 means you can open restaurants but not bars. You can do takeout, but the parks and rec centers and everything are closed. Sports is pretty well shut down, which is part of the loneliness problem. Phase 3 and 4 await a much stronger decrease in the flattened COVID-19 new cases death curve. So over the last 7 days, we've gone from over 200 new cases a day. For the last 3 days, we've been under 75. So we're not at the end of the pandemic, but we're trending down instead of just plateauing. So our scenarios are now include slowly phased reopening, plus planning for a second wave. The guidance came out yesterday on how to reopen our elementary and secondary schools. And the guidance is that every school board now has to have a plan for a second wave or a major reemergence that causes another economic shutdown or learning shutdown for our school kids. This means that strategic thinking needs to follow several paths to be nimble and ready. So what can I say about reopening in a pandemic? Don't until you're ready. Ready means all policies and procedures are in place. All staff have been trained and reboarded. Most of you have employee orientation for new employees. Now you need to have a strategic reboarding exercise for all employees so that they know, everyone knows equally what the rules are. They have the time to internalize it, and they have the time to ask questions and be assured, or you can make small changes to assure that they're trustworthy, or you deal with individual employees with specific risk behaviors in a different way. All backroom and public spaces align and encourage safe behaviors. For example, our public spaces are probably going to be allowed to open with 3 to 5 people per 1,000 square feet. but that wouldn't include the back room. So people tend to say, I've got a 30,000 square foot library branch. Yes, but how much of that is actually usable? And what we're seeing is our libraries are only opening some of their branches. So they can't open branches that are in bad places. They can't open branches that are too small. So they're looking at it, and then the lights go on. They say, well, we should move all the computers out of the closed branches into the open branches so that we have enough computers for people. We have to have the communications and signage ready to look professional and build trust. You have to have the PPE, personal protective equipment for everyone, and that we have to have the right cleaning protocols. If your library's been closed for over a month, it's not got any COVID in it if no one's been in it. However, once people start going in, you need to implement. And then when you have a model of how users have changed, and it only takes 90 days to change a habit, so people have changed their habits, build your services from the user in, not from the institution out. So if you're moving to significant number of classes online in the academic sector, how will you ensure library resources and services and information literacy and research training and services are present? How strong are your relationships with faculty and e-learning developers? Start reaching out now. They're sitting at home. For the huge change in usage of digital resources for all types of libraries, do you need to review your collection development format balance? Do you need to invest in generic e-learning creation for core library resources or through licensing large, popular, or academic e-learning collections like Gale Courses or Khan Academy or LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com? How do you get critical mass? And what is your policy around in-person programs online, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous? And how has the pandemic changed the way your users are communicated to and communicate with you? How have you reviewed your social media and website? Your website is not the destination people think of first. There's push and pull strategies. Your website is pull, your social media is push, and it's a great opportunity and cost effective. Then set your priorities. It can be much more flexible than work from home. Your coworkers are safer, reducing the number of times they go out or take public transit. Can we tip the balance from managing within office hours and shifts to managing for results? Give someone a goal and say, at the end of this week, I need all the signage for every library or whatever, and do it from home and then print it somewhere else. Can we invest in certain technology tools that enhance our services while giving us greater flexibility for work from home, flexible scheduling, calendars, etc.? And then let's review the capacity limits of our spaces with an eye to safety and what users will need to do and what the priorities are. So next big question, how do we celebrate, build staff culture, and build virtual teams? Once people start working at a distance or significant key contributors on your staff go there, we got to remember that culture trumps strategy every time. It's up to us as leaders to be positive, to make sure we are impactful, and dare we say it, a happy staff is essential. Some people are going to be stressed out. It doesn't necessarily mean they're unhappy, but we need to be caring and sharing. In Ontario, we often use the Slack tool to build formal and informal teams and for institution-wide conversations. Conversations is how we lock down learning. You can't manage an organization by memos or emails. That's just pushing it out and expecting people to internalize it. When meetings move to Zoom and the water cooler conversation is problematic and the quick coffee or tea or hallway chat doesn't happen, we better find solutions for this kind of grapevine communication. The business of culture shaping is up to you and everyone. It's a team effort. So celebrate your coworkers' wins and achievement visibly with all the tools at your disposal. You can do it. I know one CEO, or actually I know many CEOs in Ontario who every Friday in their calendar have a celebrate a certain team in their institution that has done something amazing in pivoting and adapting to what's going on. So that's the end of my prepared comments. I don't have a watch on, so I don't know how long I took. I'll reinforce what he said up front, that Stephen's Lighthouse is right there. I'm going to put these slides up on Stephen Lighthouse right after this session. And so you'll be able to look at the links and get them easily. On Stephen's Lighthouse, I filter what I think is the most important news and research that affects libraries and perspectives, that affects libraries of all types. And I also have all posts on Stephen's Lighthouse communicated through my Twitter. On focal.ca, I assemble news that is vital to decision makers in Ontario public libraries. So if you search focal.ca on Google and use a word like sanitize and disinfect, you'll get all our postings on all the research in that area. And it all goes to Focal News, and it also, both of them go, and on the Focal side, it also goes to the Federation of Ontario Public Libraries Facebook page. And then my recommendation, if you haven't already, and probably many of you do, Feedly is a great tool for setting up RSS feeds of your favorite blogs. So blogs you want to follow, you only have to look at one place and you don't need to go there regularly. And I've tried to move all of my folks in Ontario to Feedly feeds of what they want to follow. So I'm ready for questions, and let me just go back to the slide. And here I am.
Yes, sir. In fact, very nice presentation altogether. And we hope, actually the first question come to my mind, and it is also in the chat window, that what are the first strategies we should follow during COVID-19 to reopening the library? What is our first strategy? You told the one tool, it's called readiness and the nimbleness. So can you just elaborate these two things?
Well, the first strategy is you're probably going to open your core service first, and that would be circulation. So we've been prioritizing online holds and online pickups by appointment and curbside delivery. So if the library can't be open, you go to the branches that are offering curbside delivery. When the library phones the user, and they've been phoning them to say that we've got your book ready to pick up, when would you like to pick it up, and we'll have it ready at the curbside. But also they do a wellness call with the people at the same time, just to make sure they're healthy and good. So when you are allowed to be inside, the circulation area, physical resources area, has the holds on shelves, and right now that's nearly all by appointment. When people can come up and pick it up on their own, that's going to have to wait for another phase. We will take questions at the desk, but the desk has a plexiglass wall or something put on it, and many of our librarians or search staff are wearing shields and masks just to keep themselves safe. Some libraries are requesting that everyone wear a space. So when the book is checked in, it's done as hands-free as possible. And then our rule in Ontario is that it's quarantined for 72 hours before it's actually checked in and before it's reshelved. So it's the local medical practices we were having difficulty with them. We've now called them and made them cease, because they were saying, like, books are like clothing. You only need to quarantine it for 24 hours and the COVID will be gone. Except libraries tend to have plastic covers on their books and have DVDs, plastic bags they arrive in, or CDs that are plastic. Well, plastic needs 72 hours on the outside to be COVID free. So we quarantine it, put it in a logistics framework, and then open up the boxes and reshelve them then, and then they become available. So the staff are in masks and gloved and in care, and that's how we've been across Ontario using the same thing. I have seen some libraries in the United States, in an abundance of caution, doing 6 and 7 day quarantines. Our reading of the research is that's unnecessary, that 3 days is plenty, but 24 hours doesn't work with the plastic. Does that answer the question?
Yes,
Oh, we put arrows. We put arrows on the carpet and dots on the carpet to keep you 2 meters apart. That sort of stuff.
Sir, one question is coming in front of you, that is in COVID-19 situation, all depending on their courses. Having limited e-resources, how library in Indian scenario can satisfy its core user? So if you can suggest something on e-books platform, and how the library in Indian scenario can satisfy the core user, he is asking, Dr. Sushant Patil.
So this is, I was vice president of one of the largest textbook publishers for 5 years. So I'm well acquainted with many of the issues on textbooks and e-resources and that sort of stuff when I worked for Cengage. I would say that this is where libraries could shine by pulling together the tools. We know how to handle and request copyright clearance and how to license it. We know how to find open educational resources, OERs. We know how to identify and find alternatives to expensive resources and find them less expensive. So within the Indian situation, where I totally understand that you're not as well funded as a Ontario library system or university, the librarians should be able to provide some solutions by marketing themselves as experts in certain areas. So open educational resources, open access articles, putting together the tools. There are some open access search engines, there's some OER search engines, and sitting there saying, as you're helping a professor or a lecturer put together the course, say, you need to review this for accessibility. And there's important things we can do on accessibility. So India has higher levels of blindness. So what are the accessibility things that we can work with that make sure that those students can listen to a book or use it auditorily? We have students who are less wealthy mostly. So how do we make sure that we have cost-effective resources for them to move forward? So by having that open conversation with your department heads and then certain core teams where you have an opportunity to pull it together, and some of these things have already been pulled together by other libraries. And then certain core teams where you have an opportunity to pull some of these things have already pulled together by
actually, absolutely, it is a pleasure to listen from you. I have one question, that what kind of new services we can start in this COVID scenario, if you can answer from your experience. You are quite experienced, so if you can answer, what is a new service we can start in this COVID-19 scenario?
Well, I always look for opportunities and problems. So we have some serious problems around COVID misinformation and disinformation. So by taking that grip and saying, okay, we've always taught information literacy, and I hate that term because no one in most sectors thinks they're illiterate. They get good results from Google, they're smart people, but all of us, even us professionals, have been fooled by a website occasionally. And so we can take a information literacy course and frame it within the student's need or the community need around how to be safe and evaluate pandemic resources, or what are the choices. It's all the same stuff we've been doing around information literacy anyway, but I think a lot of our users are now more aware that they need to do it. And so when we see Chinese, Russian, Korean, Ukrainian bad actors putting misinformation to disrupt information, and that's been the conclusion of the United Nations and of the CIA and of CSIS in Canada. We need to be clear that you need to evaluate what's there, and it's critical to the long-term intellectual health of our countries and of our peoples. So I think there's one opportunity. There are other opportunities when you see a problem. So we identified loneliness as a problem for when you're in isolation. So how do we build services that help the lonely? So we've been doing virtual book clubs and open conversations like people used to do in the chairs in our library when they sat by our fireplaces. You need to sit there and say, what did we do that was highly valued by people that was invisible? And how do we make it visible on our website through some of these amazing tools?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Now
Thank you, sir. We have with us,
hello, can you hear me?
University. Sir, over to you, sir. If you can ask your question, please.
Okay, Banambar.
Just now, I just introduced our two guests today were joined. Professor K.C. Panda, he is a renowned person and in the field of library information in Odisha. And he is a renowned person. I have welcomed, sir. And another is Daya Madam. You are all welcome. And sir, can you tell anything else on this COVID situation?
Yeah.
Sir, tell me.
No, thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. Professor Abram, I may be pardoned because of some networking problem. I joined midway, but you gave a very excellent talk, which will help very much to our young professionals in Odisha. So, one, I have certain questions, not questions exactly, but you may consider it concerns. Since the topic of this today, the main theme is that what is the strategies that one has to adapt for reopening of libraries in pandemic. So, my question is, whatever strategies that we devise and implement, I hope that all these are to be supplemented, but not to be replaced, because we have to honor the local laws, regulations, and norms and statutes. So, keeping in view those local laws, we have to supplement the fact. What is your opinion on this?
We
I
have
would
to
like
honor
to know what is your opinion. Yeah. Number one.
Well, we do have to honor the laws here as well. And so we have direction from the government. But when the government gives direction, by human nature, it creates confusion. So we decide to be masters of our own homes. So when they give directions on only 10 people in a circle, or you can open to street front, we have to interpret that for what it means with a library style place versus a restaurant or a barber shop or a mall store. So yes, there's similarities, but also many of our librarians are unionized. We have to work through the union, and we have to reduce the confusion at the same time as working to basic principles around safety of our users and patrons. So libraries are so trusted, we got to adapt to the laws and the leadership of who should be well informed in government, but we have to take some responsibility, a large part of the responsibility for how it's implemented. So we can over implement something and make sure that we do good physical distancing. We can also choose when a person is so needy that we need to move them into a private room and do the conversational work around research support or social support.
And Mr. Abram, another thing I just found that has been very much figured in our speech, that is regarding the space management. For example, if a library has got, for example, hardly 100, 100 or 50, for example, accommodation to accommodate at a time readers, and there are, for example, 10,000 numbers of registered users, and that how to prioritize the readers to whom you can just accommodate inside, or give priority for providing service first and the next batch later. So is there any specific strategy that you have in mind? Can you suggest? Because my students are most of them are the practicing librarians in the state. They are holding very good important technical libraries and public libraries. So because the space problem is very much acute. So how to overcome this? Do you have any specific strategy for that?
We're basing our conversations around setting priorities for users are based on classes of users. So people who are coming in to borrow a book or pick up a hold are allowed to come in and leave. If you're a student and you need the computer because you don't have a computer at home, we're normally making 80% of the computers available only to students during that time because they're the priority. And 20% are kept there for senior citizens or poor people who could, because they're unemployed or retired, they could choose another time to come in and use the computers. So that we sit there and say, society needs our students doing their homework. It's due tomorrow. They need that priority. And also, if you're a registered student at your institution, would be quite different than your walk-in users. For faculty, you could request that they do a Zoom call with you or a telephone consultation rather than come into the library and say, we're trying to reserve the space for our top priority, which is the student. And that's the sort of thinking you need. Like it's different for every institution, very different. But we don't have generic user bases. We have different kinds of needs, and different portions of our physical spaces serve different needs. So the computer area versus browsing the collection versus circulation are different user personas.
Don't you think that in the post-pandemic period, the library, when it starts opening, it needs to sanitize the entire library building and the materials, different kind of treatments now are available? And do you have any specific opinion on that?
Yes. You don't need to sanitize it if it's been closed for weeks anyway, for opening. But once people are in there, there are a number of very creative things that people are doing. So for the computers, they're buying either the washable keyboards, which are like $18 each, or they're putting a sleeve of clear plastic over it, which makes it easier to wipe down and liquids don't go into the keyboards. They're giving students, the little baggies, and they're putting the baggies over the mice. And so you keep your baggie and you cover up the mouse. We are disinfecting any public services. Most of them are doing it after every transaction. Between every computer use, they're being cleaned. Our water fountains are closed. Our front desk is just wiped regularly with shields. I've seen some libraries that are very poor that go out and buy a clear shower curtain and hang it. And it's just as good as a fancy plexiglass shield, even though it doesn't look as nice. But it's an affordable solution that keeps people safe. And so I wouldn't criticize it. I'd just say everybody's safer.
I got it. Thank you, Stephen, very much for your very good answering questions. Now over to Dr. Sahu. Over to Dr. Sahu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have
Sir,
just only three simple questions that I the clarification. Thank you very much.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr.
Now
Sahu.
I requested Dr. Daya Madam. You have any questions like that? Please unmute your mic.
Hi. Good evening. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, it is audible.
Am I audible, sir?
It is audible. Please.
Sir, almost. Yes, thank you, sir. Myself, Dr. Daya Patil, working as a librarian, college librarian from last 26 years in Aurangabad from Maharashtra. Sir, my almost question have been covered by Panda, sir, about space and sanitize all this. As I am working as a college librarian, there is a question that now this is a time for the both resources like physical resources as well as the e-resources. But there is a problem for college librarian. Very less number of books are there in e-form. This is the problem. Second one, there the supporting staff college library is not techno-savvy. This is also a problem, and most important challenge before the college librarian, particularly in Maharashtra, is that there is a network accessibility connectivity problem at the remote places. Students are living at various spaces. We are giving this services from last 2 months to them. My question is that how to overcome these challenges before us.
The student residents and the population
Over to you,
density.
sir.
The student residents, where the students live, and the population density is a problem. And part of it is the library's role would be to ensure the students understood the right kinds of behaviors, because some young people think they're less at risk, but what hasn't been communicated is that they're at a greater long-term risk. Because this is a blood-borne disease, it's not. It has long-term consequences for your internal organs that could be life-threatening, but over many years. So we need to help them understand that. We also need to make sure they get supported on what they need. So some of the stuff for the print resources that aren't large books or whole things, maybe we need to up some of our staff onto their scanning game and scan things for them so that it is one-time use electronic to deal with the pandemic. We also need to maybe up our delivery services and make one of our staff on a bicycle delivering things locally, as long as they're in the right kind of safe equipment. We need to reimagine some services to keep people safe while at the same time helping them progress towards their goals, because I don't want to see students losing months or years of their education just because they're locked at home. That doesn't let them progress, and it doesn't help our society get better to have well-trained, well-educated people. Then when we're allowed to allow browsing, what we're seeing is students aren't allowed to touch the books, or if they must touch a book when they're browsing on the shelf, and it can't, and some books need to be chosen by looking at the actual book, they aren't allowed to reshelve it. We put books that are taken off into quarantine, and then they go back on the shelf 3 days later. That's, a lot of this it slows things down, but we're trying to go from stopped to slowed down, and ultimately to instant movement. But the electronic can be instant. The print is always going to be slowed down now. Does that answer your question, my doctor?
Yeah, that's the question, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much for coming and joining to our platform. And you
So
are
thank you, sir.
I think your doubt is clear. Now, I will request for coming and joining to our platform. And you are
Thank you.
I think your doubt is clear. Now, very much. I request I will request join with us. Coming and joining to our platform. And you are now, very much. I request I will join with us.
Hello. Hello.
Now, hello.
Pragnya Das,
Hello.
there. Okay, I can hear you.
Hello. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, sir. Hello. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Odisha Library Academy, sir. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Odisha Library Academy to give me the opportunity to give the formal vote of thanks. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all the delegates present over here to give me the opportunity to give the formal vote of thanks. Thank you, sir. To all the delegates present over here. I convey my gratitude to the Stephen Abraham. Thank you, sir. To all the delegates.
Due to some network problem with the Pragnya madam, now I request Dr. Panda Bijoy Panda, you will please put on mic on and you just speak about the program, and then we will request Niranjan, our webmaster, he will come and he will give the descriptions on how we are coordinating these things. And over to Niranjan. Niranjan, you just put on the mic on. You put your mic on. It is muted.
Okay. Good evening to all of you. I am Niranjan. I am the webinar administrator, and I want to announce all participants that our feedback link is already updated in our video description, and they can submit their feedback. And as usual, they will get e-certificate after submission of feedback. And I request all participants to wait at least 24 to 48 hours. And if they will not get their certificate, then they can send an email and write us at OLA Webinar-6 @gmail.com. OLA Webinar-6 @gmail.com. They can contact with us on that email ID. And I also thanks to Odisha Library Academy and our speaker. It is my great pleasure and it is a proud moment. And when we started this program, we have a confusion that this is the schedule of evening time, and maybe we have less participants than our usual program, but it is a great success. And thanks our speaker Stephen Abram sir, and we have already more viewers. We have already 2K viewers plus. And thank you.
Thank you.
One thing, what's about the statistics of our webinar? Speak 2 lines. Niranjan, can you hear me? is some problem, then now I request Mr. Bijoy Panda, you will give the formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, good morning, good evening to all of you. It is my pleasure to give formal vote of thanks to Professor Stephen Abram, and it was a good link with him. In fact, when I spoke to him earlier, he is readily agreed to help us in giving a very good informative lecture on COVID situation after strategic planning for the library. It was a very nice session, and we are humbled and thankful to sir. You have given your time for us, and you join us in and help us whatever way to Odisha Library Academy. It was a great opportunities for all of us, and it was a memorable moment for all the Odisha Library Academy people that you joined this call. It was a wonderful evening for all the participants. It was also very good learning, and I was just looking at your presentation. The one thing is keeping into my mind is open media desk. How you people are helping your customer through open media desk. And one thing is coming to mind, or the readiness and the nimbleness. It is also very good learning for all of us. Thanks to you for the opportunities, and it is actually it is a very good moment to share all the participants, and we are happy to reconnect with you if some need required from our side, and we will connect with you in future. And by this way, I would like to thank you, Dr. Banambar Sahoo, for his impassioned and for his guidance for this webinar. I would like to thank you, Dr. Vibhuti Bhushan Sahu, for his wholehearted support. And I would like to thank you, Niranjan and Dr. Satyaranjan Sahu, for coordinating with webinar team and all technical support done by them, so that we will able to host it in our YouTube channel. It was a pleasure to thank you, Dr. K.C. Panda, who joined in on time and help us to bring this Odisha Library Academy movement through this webinar. I would like to thank Dr. Patil, who joined from this for this webinar and share our thoughts about the library community. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Mr. Jadhav, who helped also in creating the webinar posters and all. And it is, and last but not the least, those who are the viewers in Academy, and they have support for this academy. Unfortunately, we lost
Thank you very much. And I can announce here, during this COVID time in India, Odisha Library Academy is the only organization who is continuously organizing this webinar, and it is grand success of this webinar is due to our total team members of Odisha Library Academy, who are the young and dynamic professionals who are working together during COVID time, sitting in the home. They are working, and it is now successful team members of Odisha Library Academy were successful due to this. And now, actually, one of our executive member, is Pragnya Das, due to some network problem, she could not be joined. Now she has joined with us. Now, can you speak 2 lines, Pragnya? Some network problem, she could not be joined. Now she has joined with us. Now, can you speak 2 lines, Pragnya?
Sir, good afternoon. Hello.
yes, madam.
हाँ sir. Thank you. Hello. 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 Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for connecting with us, sir. Thank you, Odisha Library Academy, to give me the opportunity to give the formal vote of thanks. to the delegates present over here. I convey my regards to the Stephen Abraham, the Executive Director of the Federation of the Ontario Public Libraries, to share the valuable information to the library professional. We are very much thankful to the Dr. Banambar Sahoo, President of the OLA, chairing the session. We are very much thankful to the Satyaranjan Sahu, Dr. Basanta Kumar, Niranjan Mohapatra, Dr. Sambudar Sahu in backend. We are very much thankful to our participants and the viewers we are very much thankful to our participants and viewers, yes, on your YouTube and on Facebook. We are very much thankful to Panda, PCS and Nrusingha K of Silicon are successfully coordinating the webinar. We are very much thankful to our office bearer, OLA, Dr. Kamal Jana, Vice President, Dr. Basudev Mahanti, Secretary, Dr. Abhinas Das, Treasurer, and Dr. Bhubaneswar Sahu for arranging the resource person for OLA webinar. Then we are happy, and all the OLA members who are heartily supported for this webinar. Thank you, Stephen Abram, for conducting with us. Thank you once again.
And thank you, Dr. Nrusingha K. I forgot to mention. And thank you, co-host of this evening. And thank you, our OLA President, Dr. Banambar Sahoo. And last but not the least, Stephen Abram, you agreed us at that time and host this webinar successfully. Thank you so much. And we had a great time with you.
Thank you.